unconsciously your brain is picking up that something's out of balance. And when you've got a binocular visual dysfunction, it's a loss of coordination or an effortful coordination between the two eyes. And it's not just the convergence part of it, it's also when you look at something, you need to line up the eyes into the same area of space, but you also need to have your focusing line up as well. So you've got those a couple of systems that sort of have to stay in coordination, and they're meant to kind of ebb and flow and sort of flexibly work with each other. Now, if they become out of balance, either the two eyes out of balance with each other, or the convergence system is out of balance with focusing, then that creates extra resources that you have to start concentrating. You have to start concentrating on not making errors, maybe in depth perception, making errors when you're moving your eyes across a page, those sorts of things. And that increases internal stress and tension. And the way that our brain kind of elevates the warning is through a headache.
So is it something that people are consciously aware of, or is it something that's sort of happening beneath the surface that we might not be aware of?
Yeah, and I think that, and we can talk about that. You voluntarily, if you keep going at a particular activity that you find difficulty with, there's a subconscious kind of drive to keep going with it, and so it is relatively unconscious, even though there's a bit of effort involved. I don't think people sort of realise what's going on. They're pushing themselves, but not realising that they're actually pushing their visual system.
And so when we talk about binocular vision dysfunction, that doesn't necessarily mean that people might be seeing double vision, does it?
Yeah, and look, that's long been one of those symptoms. And I remember, when we did our training, or you read textbooks on binocular vision, and it's like double vision being one of the symptoms, and you kind of go, it's one of the really extreme symptoms. I think this idea that, if binocular vision breaks down completely, then yes, you do get double vision, but that's kind of the fight that people are having. They're fighting it going double, they're fighting it going blurry, and it's the fight that creates tension, eye strain, and then the headaches that go along with it. And so someone coming in with eye strain and headaches means, and even blur and double vision means that they're really persisting at a task. There's something that they're really trying to get done. They're trying really hard to make something happen, because other people may decide to give up. It doesn't feel comfortable to do, and they don't reach a point of a headache, and so they just give up instead, or they back their performance off to some level that's not quite so stressful. But yeah, I think you'd have to have a reasonable degree of breakdown for it to land at double vision. So there's so much happening way before double vision occurs, unless you're dealing with the kind of binocular vision dysfunction that comes from having an injury, like a brain injury, whiplash, concussion, where it's a more sudden onset kind of double vision, because that's a big shock to the system.
So the types of binocular vision dysfunction that you see, is that something that affects mostly kids, mostly adults, seniors? Like, are there any sort of like age patterns where it matches?
No, it's probably more related to tasks. So, any task that you spend a long time doing that you find challenging to do can result in headache. I mean, you probably more associate it in situations where there's a bit more high pressure. So it's going to be school aged through to working aged. Someone who may be retired may not sort of have the same level of kind of drive to be doing an activity at a level that creates those kind of symptoms, or they might be doing more pleasurable symptoms. And so there's some of the things you need to tease out that you see it clinically, and I've seen it sort of looked at in research, is that there is a difference in symptoms between someone doing what we call required activities versus pleasure activities. So required activities would be studying, having to read a textbook, having to do computer work that's related to some sort of time pressure, either study or work. And then if you go and spend an equal amount of time gaming, reading a book for pleasure, or doing some other activity that doesn't have the time pressures, the stress pressures, the cognitive pressures in the background, one will create a headache and the other one won't. And so it can get quite complex and confusing as to why, they don't get a headache from gaming for 2 hours, but they get a headache from 15 minutes of reading. And on the surface, you kind of go, well, there's similar distances, there's similar levels of attention involved, but the type of task, and you can even deep dive into your own self-appraisal of the task. If you already think it's going to be stressful, then one might argue that might increase your chances of getting a headache. Right. If you find the task unpleasant, then one might argue you might increase your chances of getting a headache.